members of the Academy, I hope you're listening. Hope you've got your notepads out and you're ready to implement all the changes that we are about to propose to you. We're going to fix the Oscars today.
Let's do it.
So today what we're going to do is that we're going to propose some ideas for how to fix the Oscars, or how to improve the Oscars, if you don't want to be so pessimistic and say that they need fixing, but some ideas for how it could be better. We haven't really provided any guidelines beyond just that vague notion, so anything's up in the air. We haven't given each other any clues about what we're going to say, so we're just going to run some ideas past each other here and see if we agree or not. Craig, do you want to get started here? Do you want to tell me what your number one idea is for how to improve the Academy Awards?
Okay, for sure. So my number one idea, it's kind of like a two-parter. So this is an overhaul of the acting categories that I think is definitely needed. So my idea here is that we take the best, like the leading actor or actress categories, and we expand that field from 5 to up to 10, like we've got for the Best Picture race, so that there's more potential actors that are nominated here. And while we're doing that, we keep the supporting at a field of 5, but we impose a screen time limit. So you have to be like less than, let's say, like 30% of the screen time in the film. And the motivation behind this is like this is where we see a lot of what people consider category fraud. I feel like often there's a lot of really good, compelling, interesting supporting performances that just don't stand a shot because they are like the one-off, the bit characters that just come in and make a smaller impact, or they have limited screen time but make a big impact on the film. That's what, in my mind, that category is meant to award. It's not meant to award, like Paul Mescal, who is debatably like a lead. I think that the lead qualifier is, it just makes it overall messy. So I feel like expanding that acting category, we would see people like, well, probably Paul Mescal would be in there, but Jesse Plemons, who I think really deserves to be in the conversation for Best Actor, being in there, and we don't have the same kind of category fraud that we would like. So that's my number one idea, that I feel like the Oscar needs to implement something like that. And that is not even broaching the fact that I think eventually they're going to have to do something about the gendered categories. I don't know how you tackle that when you've got a field that large, but that's my idea to fix the Oscars as they currently stand.
Yeah, just about your last point, it is interesting because one of these days we are going to get like a non-binary performer who's getting like Oscar buzz, and then that's going to throw the whole question of how do they run? Is there no possibility to run them in either category? How do they deal with this conversation? That hasn't really happened yet, but that's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, totally. It's actually surprising it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I like it. My biggest hesitation would be just the idea of bloat, the idea that you're nominating too many people. You get like too many undeserving nominees, and it feels less prestigious to be a nominee because there are too many people being nominated. But I do like the idea of getting more people in the conversation. If you look at some of the old Oscars from like the 1930s, as we do sometimes in the show, they often nominated a ton of people. Like the categories would be full of nominees. Often there weren't defined limits on how many there could be. So you could have like 10 people nominated in a category. 10 actors and 10 actresses is a lot. So I'm on the fence about it personally. Like I said, I'm worried about it feeling too watered down, and then we get less of those kind of debates after the nominations are announced in terms of, oh, they cut this person, damn. But if they cut this person, like who should they have taken away to make room for them? It feels less competitive just to make it into the nomination stage, and takes away some of the drama of who gets cut, since a lot of people have to get cut when there's only 5 per category. But I do like your idea.
I'm open to like making it 10, or instead of 10, making it 7. Like I feel like 7 might be the sweet spot there, where you're getting a few of those like borderline performances where otherwise studios would be campaigning within the supporting category.
Yeah. No, I do like it. There's definitely potential there.
So what's your number one idea?
Okay, so I have one big sort of pet peeve of mine that I think is a way that we could improve the Oscars, that we can improve their reliability in the eyes of the public and the purity of the results. And that is that I think we should remove the vote from publicists and agents.
Okay.
So let me dig into this a little bit, because I did prepare my speech to convince everybody in the Academy who's listening right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So according to the latest published figures, there are currently 11,104 voting members of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, who are divided into 20 branches based on what their jobs are in the film industry. So that's how it works. The largest branch is actors. There are currently 1,307 members in that branch. The second largest branch is executives with 812, followed by animation at 746. That's way too many, but that's another story. Crazy. And documentary is next at 736. But the fifth biggest group is marketing and public relations with 732 members. In addition to that, in 2020, the Academy gave voting rights to the formerly non-voting members of the artist representatives branch. That means agents. The new branch added 271 agents with full voting privileges. So if you combine marketing and public relations with the newly empowered artist representatives branch, that's 1,003 publicists and agents voting on the Oscars, meaning publicists and agents now make up 9% of the total voting body. So 9% maybe doesn't sound like that much, right? But it does if you take into account that directors only make up 5.7% of Oscars voters, or that writers only make up 4.9%, or that cinematographers, makeup artists, hairstylists, and costume designers all combined only make up 7.6%. So my problem with this is just that agents and publicists aren't filmmakers. It's the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. People who get paid to do like marketing and brand awareness are not artists or scientists in this world. They're hangers-on. They're barnacles attached to the hull of the industry. I get that they have a living to make and a purpose to serve, but they're not involved in filmmaking, and it's no secret that they generally don't really care or know that much about filmmaking. If the Oscars are supposed to be about the industry celebrating the craft and skill that goes into creating cinema, why did we extend the franchise to this relatively massive block of non-filmmakers involved in work completely distinct from the art form and only tangentially related to the business? So I think that artists and publicists, agents and publicists are diluting the voting body, weakening the validity of the results, and they shouldn't be voting at all. So a little history lesson on how we got here. The original Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences was inaugurated in 1927, and there were 36 members. There are 12 producers, 7 actors, 6 directors, 6 writers, 3 technicians, and 2 lawyers. 2 lawyers is a little bit weird, but otherwise... that breakdown of the 36 people, that kind of feels like what you would think the Academy is. It's not really clear when publicists began to creep into the voting block, because the Academy doesn't publish official membership rolls or track the history of the branches, which makes it kind of frustrating to try to research this stuff. But we know publicists were already an established part of the Academy by 1970. And we know that because that's the last time prior to 2016 that there was a major reform made to the voting body. That's when the Academy president at the time, Gregory Peck, tried to clean up the voting rolls. As I've mentioned before on the show, by 1969, it had become kind of impossible to ignore that the Oscars were really out of touch with current pop culture. So to his credit, Academy President Peck recognized that there was a problem, and in 1970 tried his best to bring the Academy voting body into the contemporary era. He made a push to invite younger people to join AMPAS, waiving eligibility requirements for hip newcomers like Dustin Hoffman, Robert Evans, Dennis Hopper, Barbra Streisand. But he also recognized that just bringing more people in wasn't going to be enough to solve the problem, and that some people had to be pushed out. So he had an audit that redesignated 335 voting members as associates, meaning they lost their voting rights. Some of them did get their status back on appeal, but most of them that were kicked out stayed kicked out. A lot of those were people who hadn't actually worked in the cinema for a long time. Some of them were people who were in the crafts, and they were determined to be just not as important enough to the cinema to have their voting rights maintained. And some of them were people who were working in public relations, who we just deemed that were not sufficiently involved in filmmaking. And I think he was 100% right about that. He was unhappy with the creeping growth of non-filmmakers into the voting body, and he also held the fort during his tenure. Because at the same time, there was a push to include agents in the Academy, and when Peck was asked about this, he couldn't have been more clear. He said, "Over my dead body." So the next time there was a major reform of the Academy was the one that we're probably mostly aware of, which is the one that started in 2016, following the Oscars So White movement, which called attention to the fact that the Academy was not only overwhelmingly white, but was overwhelmingly old and male. So the president at that time, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, spearheaded the job of starting to diversify the voting body by adding more people to it. And that has been a process that's been ongoing over the course of several years, which is why the voting rolls have been swelling since then. But unlike Gregory Peck, it was a one-pronged approach. It was not a two-pronged approach in the sense that they started welcoming more people in, but they did not kick people out as well, the way that Gregory Peck had in 1970. So most of the new non-white or international members who were brought in to try and bring the diversity stats up, which are up now, but are still the diversity stats of the Academy are about the same as like the Republican Party in the United States. So it's not exactly like they've completely fixed the problem in terms of making the diversity in line with the American population at large, but regardless of that, many of the new members were accepted in visual effects, which is part of the reason why you see that number very high, as well as casting directors, which is also a recent addition, and also a lot of publicists. And previously, you could be accepted as a publicist only if you did publicity for the studios generally, but in 2017, there was a rule change which made it okay for personal publicists who represent like specific actors to also get voting rights. Then in 2020, with Gregory Peck's body now cold for 17 years, the ultimate indignity happened when personal agents were allowed to join as full voting members. This is something the agents had been trying to accomplish since at least 1969. And finally, perhaps because of the zeal for reform or because it allowed another way to pad diversity stats, or probably just because the Academy finally buckled to this consistent pressure, the gates were opened and the parasites were allowed to access the inner sanctum. Since then, publicity and marketing and the artist representative branches have been amongst the fastest growing segments of the votership, and this has come at the expense of other branches. The case of the actors branch is illustrative. In 2011, there were 1,172 actors with voting privileges, which gave them 20.3% of the total vote. Today, the 1,307 actors represents 11.8% of the total vote, meaning actors as a whole are almost half as important in determining the outcome as they were 15 years ago. Other above-the-line creative categories like directors and writers have also seen their share of the vote dramatically decline. So just to get back to why I care about this, I think that you, Craig, and everybody listening can agree that we want the Oscars to be what they claim to be when they talk about themselves. They want to be a celebration of the year's greatest films as judged by the industry. And if we want to take them seriously when they talk about taking pride in the industry's artistic accomplishments, we need to believe that these decisions are being made by people actually invested in cinema as an art form, not simply as a business. We want to be reassured that actual film artists are voting on these things. The people who take a difficult art form seriously rather than the people who take an easy paycheck readily. The publicists and agents are just not serious enough film people to be entrusted with these votes. And I get that the publicists have an important role to play in the industry, notably making sure the movies make money, but there's already an award for movies that make money. It is the money itself. And the argument for the agents is that they now do actually have an important part in making movies because often a production only gets off the ground once a star is connected to a project, and the agent is the one doing that connection, which is fine, sure, but there are lots of tangentially related industries that are technically necessary to get a movie made. Truck drivers are needed to bring equipment to a set. Caterers are needed to provide lunch. But they're not invested enough in the artistic choices of filmmaking to be an Academy member. We understand why there's no Academy Award for Best Publicity or no Academy Award for Best Agenting. So why are they voting in the first place? And obviously agents have bias too, have personal biases. That was one of the reasons why Gregory Peck thought it was ridiculous to give them the vote. And the response to that is that, well, everybody in Hollywood has biases. Everybody has preferences, or they're the ones themselves up for the, Timothée Chalamet can vote for himself for Oscar. How can you say he doesn't have a bias? But I don't think that's the same thing at all. Timothée Chalamet earned the right to vote because he did that performance. He made the movie.
Right.
His agent should not have the right to double up his vote simply because he's getting paid 15% of Timmy's profits and has a vested interest in his success. This succubus is only there to siphon off money, so his bias is more serious because that's all he does. He doesn't make movies. He's a pestering seagull stealing scraps who now wants to be treated the same as the fisherman who caught the fish. Anyway, you get my perspective.
Yeah, totally.
So what I understand that it may be not practicable to just say that as of right now, they're all kicked out. To go full Stalinist and just immediately disband all the publicists and agents and rip up their documents and send them off to labor in Siberia or Apple TV Plus probably wouldn't be workable. And starting in 2016, another one of the concessions they made is they did start telling people that they can have lifetime voting privileges, which they didn't before. Only some people have those, people who have been previously nominated for an Oscar or who have been in the industry for 30 years or 3 decades, actually. It can actually start as recently as 21 years, depending on when they're accepted. But you are allowed to kick people out. The organization's bylaws say that voting status is subject to continuous review by the Board of Governors. That's the bylaw that Gregory Peck used. And the fact that a few people have lifetime voting privileges, that might actually allow them to do it a bit more softly. They can say those people, if they're marketing people who qualify for like a lifetime voting privilege, they have them. We won't touch them. The others, you're out. The agents have only been there for 5 years. You could kick them out right away. But the rest, You could have like emeritus members who get to stay on. But you don't add any more. So that branch of the tree just slowly withers and dies out. And
I really, really like this idea. I think the one thing that needs to be taken into account is that you need to solve the problem that adding them was originally designed to do. Like, how do you increase the diversity without like adding the agents and publicists? Do you see
add more diverse directors, more diverse writers, more diverse cinematographers, more diverse editors, more diverse producers? You add them in other branches, and you can also take away some old people too from the other branches as well, like Gregory Peck did. You can have the 2-pronged approach where you add some and take some away instead of just flooding it with more people and hoping that the problem gets solved that way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you see do you see anything that should be added to the body? Do you think like there's room for critics?
In theory, it would make the results better, right? If critics were in there. It's kind of not what the Academy is about, though. The Academy, like I said, it's always been about the people who make movies now judge which movies they want to celebrate, that they want to uphold to the general public as the best examples of the work being done in our industry. There are awards like the Golden Globes, like the Critics' Choice Awards, like the Film Critics Circles Awards, like they have in different cities.
Teen Choice Awards.
Sure. I don't know what they're voted on, but sure, I'll take your word for it. There are different awards that are awarded by critics. I feel like the Academy Awards are a different thing. And that we should kind of maintain the purity of that. And I think it would be hypocritical of me to rant about how people who are not real filmmakers are voting for the Oscars and then say that critics should be allowed in because they're not filmmakers either. And I think that if we can finally solve that problem and just purify it a little bit, then we can actually kind of get back to treating cinema seriously as an art form, or at least making it look that way, and probably improving the quality of the winners in the process. And then once that's done, we can move on to the next phase of my plan, which will be doing something about the 723 visual effects artists and 746 animators who are also clogging up the vote count. But that's another story.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. I didn't realize that agents had a vote, actually.
Yeah, so and it's like I said, crazy. It's brand new. It's just since 2020. They've been trying for so long, and they finally let them in the door. And I just think the standards are sliding.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I like it.
Nice.
So I had another idea for what we can do to improve the Oscars, and this is like less about the Oscars fixing the product of the Oscars, but fixing like Oscars as a utility, like a function of the industry. And this is a revision to the eligibility for films for Oscars. I personally believe that we should be using the Oscars in order to increase people attending the theater. And so I think the fact that we've got all these streaming services that are able to just kind of game the distribution eligibility requirement by having limited release in Los Angeles and New York, and then just dumping it onto their service and still being eligible for an Oscar needs to be corrected. So the idea would be that a film has to demonstrate that it has been available to the general public in multiple independent markets over a certain amount of time, not just limited within New York and Los Angeles. One of the problems thinking this through with this approach is that it gives the major studios a bit more of an edge over things like foreign films and indies. So I think that in order to do this, you would need to implement some exceptions. And some exceptions that I thought for this would be if a film has been screened in competition at a major festival going in, then that should be allowed, because that's not something that the streaming services or studios are able to just buy. You know, they can't just buy a competition. And another thing would be if a film has been submitted under the national film submission. So, in order to be considered for a international film, you need to be submitted by the body for your country as a submission. So each country only gets to submit one, or at least that's my understanding. So allowing those films to be eligible across the Oscars would still allow foreign films without having to meet the distribution requirements, or some other sort of independent distributor test, whether that is through like screenings at nonprofit cinematheques or like festival and theaters, some sort of independent distributor test in order to allow for independent films to have more of a presence. And if it does get gamed, then maybe you cap the amount of exceptions that each company is allowed to have, to like two films that they're able to get excluded from the wide release criteria.
Yeah, I like it. So yeah, when you first presented the abstract, my immediate reaction was, hold on, you're giving an advantage to big movies, to big studio films. But you've addressed that with the ideas about the cutouts for important festivals and giving an independent distribution pass. So yeah, I can see that there are ways that you could work that. I definitely do like the idea of the Academy showing a preference for the theatrical experience, and for considering that an integral part of what makes cinema, and the way they could police that is what movies are eligible, and to do that a little bit more thoroughly than the current system, which, like you say, it can just be gamed by Netflix doing a token couple screenings that just get it eligibility. With the Oscars, something we haven't talked about on the show yet, but with the Oscars eventually moving to Netflix in 2029.
Or YouTube is where they're going.
Is it a Netflix?
I think it's YouTube.
I thought it was Netflix. Either way, the Oscars moving to an online streaming.
Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're down there.
Yeah. The idea of it being a celebration of cinema as like a theatrical experience is going to be even more degraded. So it does make sense to try to check that with extra guardrails that will protect the idea of this being a celebration of cinema, and we define cinema as something that you can see in a theater.
Yeah, but I think another thing about it's not just about the theater experience. The streaming platforms have an impact on like the body of the film, like the actual like content. There's lots of stories, at least within the TV world where the studio, Netflix, will give notes to productions in order to update their dialogue so that there's more exposition where they're talking about what has happened, because people are watching these as a second screen. They're just like scrolling on their phone while they have a movie up. Whereas when you're in a theater, you've got a dedicated viewing experience. And I think that it's important that we push back on the creep of this like attention span Subway Surfer style movies where we've got the plot being spoken out and spoon fed to us as we're listening, the podcastification of film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I like that idea a lot. I think I think there has to be more of an effort by different branches of the industry, including the Academy, to preserve the idea that now more than ever, now that there are like all these distractions, like you said, and streaming movies that take the idea of distractions into account, to preserve the idea that you go to the cinema because that's where you have no distractions, because that's where you're locked in and where you're actually considering the art form the way it was supposed to. Nice. Yeah, I would vote for that. So I only really prepared like one researched concept, so don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with another rant. But one more idea that I do like, that I have been thinking about as a way to improve the experience of the Academy Awards, and specifically the run up to the Academy Awards. I wonder if it might be cool to treat Best Picture the way they treat like elections in France, where you have like a preliminary round where all the candidates are there, and then the results of that vote will determine who the two finalists are. And then you have another vote to determine the winner of the two finalists. So you could have that preliminary round for Best Picture just on its own, one round of voting. And then for the next round of voting, you have all the categories, plus you vote for Best Picture among the two finalists. The reason why I like that idea is just the drama of the thing. And we have a ranked balloting system right now so that people do enumerate the movies they like the most from 1 to 10. And then the ones that are least popular will get eliminated progressively until there is a 50% plus one winner. So we do kind of have that process of elimination leading up to a winner, but it all happens with one round of vote. You could split that into two rounds of votes, which would give the opportunity for people whose favorite films have been eliminated to then choose a new path among the two that are left. And that would give us a second round of campaigning. And that's kind of the part that I think would be fun. Because
that's true.
Say this year it came down to One Battle After Another versus Sinners, as it probably would if we did that. Then both the Sinners camp and the One Battle After Another camp have to woo the people who really like Hamnet, and have to find ways to be like, okay, who are the Hamnet voters and how can we convince them that they should vote for our movie and not the other guy's movies? You would have the second round of trying to win over specific voting groups who voted for specific other movies that are no longer there, and then see how they get directed to one of the two streams. And I like that as a campaigning thing and as a way to build hype too. I think having the two rounds would get a lot more people invested in the idea and the hype of like, oh, which movie is actually going to win Best Picture, since you have the two stages and then you have that secondary round of trying to convince the different partisans who no longer have a dog in the fight which way they should lean.
As someone who like follows the races, I like this. I think it would add a lot of excitement to the Oscar season. I wonder how it would go over with the casual Oscar watcher, the person that is just tuning in on the night to only have two Best Pictures, because expanding the field to 10 had like increased viewership, and there was films that people recognize. I feel like if you had just the two nominees, then you might not get that. It would be interesting if you had that in addition to having like a box office cinematic achievement like the Golden Globes have. Maybe that's a way to offset it. But I feel like the marketability of being a Best Picture nominee, that's a huge boost for a lot of films as well. And so that would be something that I wonder if the studios would be open to this idea at all.
Yeah. I feel like you could still call all 10 Best Picture nominees, but then you could have the other category of Best Picture finalists. Only 2 movies get to call themselves Best Picture finalists, but still 10 get to say they're Best Picture nominees. But you're right. It could impact some casual viewers' interest because like the person who is really into F1 this year and is like, oh, I wonder if F1 could win. Well, people who are like following along to the Oscar season like us know that it doesn't have a shot. But that person who's very casual, who doesn't pay close attention to the Oscars might be like, oh, maybe the F1 movie that I really liked could win because it's one of the nominees. So they're tuning in for that because they don't know that there's no way it's going to happen. So you might lose those casual viewers who are just interested in one of the specific 10 movies. That I see as a potential flaw of the plan.
So I did have some other like smaller changes, namely just thinking about some potential like categories that could be added. One category that I thought would be interesting to come back would be the best stunt category. So that was a category that was historically in the Oscars, and I feel like it would be interesting to have that make it.
Good news for you! It's coming the next year. Next year, it's back.
Oh, boom!
Yeah, you already won.
That's great. Okay, I don't know how I didn't know that, but that's awesome. So they're already listening to Oscars Outsider.
Yeah.
You should too. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss. Another thing that I thought might be interesting would be to add a category that captures the cultural impact, a retrospective best picture. So we look back either like 5 years or 10 years ago at the films of that year and nominate them for their cultural impact so that we can look back on that year and be like, actually, Coda wasn't the film that everyone is remembering. It was whatever. I feel like that would be kind of interesting. And I feel like that's something that streamers could really get on board with, since that content now likely lives on their platform. It might add a boost to the views on that content and increase the subscribership. So that's one thing that I thought might be interesting, because I think a lot of times we like to look back on the years and be like, oh, I wonder how this would be viewed as a winner. A lot of the off-season talk on the Oscar race subreddit is about, oh, how would this be viewed as a winner? Or do you think these performances should have been nominated? And I think that would be pretty interesting, and maybe not as part of the main Oscar category. You could even do a mid-season ceremony where we do a retrospective on cultural impact and kind of reevaluate the films of 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, just to keep the Oscars in people's mind.
Yeah, I think that would be cool because it would be creating a lot of debates, and we should have a lot of debates. I could understand the filmmakers being really pissed off if their movie wins Best Picture, then 5 years ago they have another Academy Awards where they're like, actually, you shouldn't have won Best Picture. Psych.
Maybe it'll drive them to do better.
One thing I would like to see, you mentioned the idea of category fraud being a bit of an issue in terms of people being like, well, why do they get to run Paul Mescal as Best Supporting Actor? They could just run him in any category they want. Apparently, there's no rules. Why don't we make a rules court that will actually hand down rulings on these things? There should be after. It's hard to say because people don't actually technically submit for a certain category. They campaign for a certain category, right? They say in the trade ads, for your consideration for Best Supporting Actor. So they don't actually submit in a category. But maybe after, I'm kind of spitballing here, as you can tell, trying to work this out in my head as I speak. But maybe after they announce kind of the long list for each category, you could have streamed or televised. Televised would be reaching too far, but streamed, you should have somebody come out and issue rulings and be like, we have determined that Paul Mescal is actually invalid for Best Supporting Actor, as he was positioned by the studio to be in and was on the long list. But we in ahead of announcing the short list, we have scrapped him from the category for these reasons. And they issue the rulings and they show like this amount of screen time. His name appeared here on the call sheet. They give you details about why they decide to allow or refuse certain. It would be like like ruling on a suspension in sports. Somebody comes out, they've got graphs. If they need to have graphs, they've got data, and they tell you why they've decided to rule this way. And I just think that would be a really fun spectacle.
I think
that would have to take the risk. Like if you were the studio and you're like, Chase Infinity has a much better shot, I think, of getting into Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress. Do we take the risk of running her in the category where she has a better chance, knowing that her nomination might get stricken from the record, and it's part of the punishment? You can't rerun her in another category. Do we you have to make that calculation? That could be part of the drama of Oscar season too.
Yeah, I like the idea of this entire ecosystem of like lobbyists and lawyers that are like assessing these things and coming up with like smear campaigns and lobbies for why someone should be excluded or included. I think that would be a really, really fun addition to the campaign season. I feel like it's like no shot that it would happen, but it would definitely make things a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Just a couple more. I won't drag this out anymore, but some categories that I thought might be interesting would be a best character category where we are awarding something kind of within the film. It's not like an actual necessarily a craft, but this could be awarded to a combination of both the actor and the writer. I feel like that would be interesting. I feel like we could see some really interesting winners there. And
that's kind of like what they do at like the Teen Choice Awards and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
like elements from the movie rather than like an actual person who did a specific task on that movie.
Yeah, smoochiest kiss or whatever.
Hell yeah.
And another thing that I was contemplating, I didn't think of a real solution for this, but one thing that I do appreciate is the fact that the screenplay category is broken into adapted and original. I feel like there's a case to be made where you could do this with the acting categories just because of the people that are portraying actual people are adapting their performance based on something original, or also like, things like Frankenstein, or that's a character that's an adaptation. I feel like that's a different type of performance than completely building something absolutely new and pulling it out of the ether and out of your fiber. You're drawing more on external references and inspiration. So I thought that might be interesting. And
that could be an interesting way to have more nominees, which to your first point, have more nominees for acting, but keep them siloed off in a different way. It would create debates. Like you would be like, is Timothée Chalamet portraying a version of the real life table tennis player Marty Reisner, or
true.
Is Marty Mauser a completely different character? But I think that's a feature, not a bug. Those debates, like I like the debates about like which screenplays are actually original or adapted. Like when we had Barbie and it was run as original screenplay, and people were like, oh, it's based on a toy, so it's not it's an adaptation, not original. I think having those kind of debates is part of the fun of the run up. So I would support it for the fact that it would sometimes be unclear where to draw the line. I think that's a feature.
Yeah, I like that. And I was thinking if I couldn't think of a way that you could kind of address the Marvelization of cinema. That's one of the things, like when I was taking on this task and came up with the eligibility, like this is a problem that I see. The theater is dying. We need to fix it. The Marvelization of cinema, where we've got so many films that are being made with huge budgets, and the death of like the mid-budget film, and everything is based on an intellectual property, and we don't have that same marketability of movie stars. That's a problem that I think needs to be solved. I don't know if there's a way to do that via the Oscars, or help combat that via the Oscars.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Though maybe that'll just die its own death, because if you look at the movies nominated for Best Picture this year, there's not really those big IP movies. You know, they chose not to go with Avatar, not to go with Wicked. Is F1 an IP movie? I think it's a different category. I don't think that counts, you know?
Yeah. The Universal Monsters cinematic universe we got in there.
Yeah, the Thomas Pynchon extended universe is also well represented. But I can't wait for Sinners versus Frankenstein. That's going to be the next Universal heavy hitter is going to be that. All right, so I think we have some good ones. So I'm looking forward to the Oscars in 2027 when they implement all of these changes.
Yeah, we fixed them.
Yep. You're welcome, guys. We're just in it for the love of the game.